Hello, this is my podcast for Sociology 151, Social Class and Inequality. This is my mother here,
Hello.
and she is a licensed marriage and family therapist who owns two behavioral health clinics, a nonprofit and a for profit called Livable Behavioral Health, as well as 4C Children and Family Services. She deals with all types of different people of different ethnicities, different sexualities, as well as different income classes. And I thought it would be interesting to pick her mind about her history, the different things that she goes through, as well as her perceptions on how she raised us, as well as what socialized her to be the way that she is now. So we will go through a few of C.W. Mills's theories in the article that we read in class, and we will try to apply them as best as we can to our lives. And so let's begin. So the first quote that I have is, "What ordinary men are directly aware of and what they try to do are bounded by their private orbits in which they live. Their visions and their powers are limited to the close-up scenes of job, family, neighborhood, and milieu." So when I think about this, I essentially think about like how we're socialized and how nothing that we think is our own, but we're conditioned to believe the things that we believe, whether that is for right or wrong, whether that's from our parents, whether that's from our families, whether that's from movies, dances that we see at the time. And as children, like our minds are so, what would be the word?
For children?
As for children, your mind is so it's so
Blank. There's nothing there until you
until people
experience.
around you like are
Until you
putting
start
these
absorbing things around
you
you.
know
Yeah.
exactly. And so I would first want to ask, what persuaded you to become a licensed marriage and family therapist?
I think most people who become therapists in an attempt to heal their own selves.
Okay.
Looking back on becoming a therapist was not my first career choice. First of all, it was not. It was, I wanted to go into some sort of healthcare business, but not necessarily therapy. That career came across my path after I had you, and then I had to decide what life looked like, because I couldn't do what I wanted to do because you needed me to be around, and so I had to pivot to figure out like what could I do where I had more time, I could make above a livable wage, I could be self-employed, and so my experience of becoming a young mother is what led me to becoming a therapist for some of those reasons. Being able to, and it worked out because I've never been unemployed. I've lived above a livable wage. I've always had employment opportunities. But I think so that's part of it. But I also think the other thing is understanding that as an African American woman who was going to raise a son by herself, because I knew that I was going to be a single parent. There were going to be certain struggles that you were going to have to endure that I needed to be ready for. And my family culture did not support healthy male experiences, especially black male experiences.
I would like to dissect that a bit, but starting from what you first said. As a child, were you conditioned to what success, or at least what success to you even looked like? Like, what made you decide that you wanted to go to college, being as though that you were a first generation 4-year university student?
I lived a life at two extremes. My father was wealthy, but my mother lived in abject poverty. Like we was poor, like we were poor. And I think seeing living at that one extreme with my mother for most of the time, and then getting a taste of the freedom that money can bring is why I think college was a viable option for me.
And let me stop you there before you continue. Did you know? Did grandpa go to college?
He has some sort of law education, but I'm not really sure.
But did he get a 4-year degree?
I don't know. I don't think so.
But what do you think it was that made you think that college is the reason why I could attain the wealth of my father?
Because I think that somewhere along the line, I realized that education was a great equalizer. Like, it was the one thing that I knew that people did to stabilize their lives was to go get education. And that wasn't something that was like directly.
It wasn't. You weren't conditioned to
No,
go to
to
college.
go. No, I was not. I was not conditioned to go to college. I was conditioned to be poor.
But what did that look like?
What did what look like?
Being conditioned to be poor. What were the things that you witnessed growing up that were the antithesis of pursuing your education? What did that look like?
I mean, everything around me. Like, everybody in my family was poor. Everybody was on welfare.
Everyone was poor.
Everybody was poor. The only aunt that worked was my Aunt Jackie. And if my aunts did work, they didn't work long at these jobs. They were, they didn't work. They weren't like careers, and they would stay at the jobs or get fired, or I'm not really sure what their stories were, but they never were employed long enough. Even my mother was underemployed, worked different odds and ends, never made more than minimum wage, maybe a little bit above minimum wage.
None of this work was sustainable. It was all just almost like hustles, essentially.
Right. We never had like reliable transportation. We never had enough of anything. I mean, we always had enough food. Thank God for food stamps and food programs and things along that line. And we always had stable housing, but it was never ever talked about what plans I had for the future. It was never discussed.
It was always survival.
It was always survival, and I don't think they were given that either. My grandmother didn't work. She was married at 15 and had 5 kids by the time she was 21. And there are a lot of dynamics I think that she passed on to her children. And I think that what my aunts were looking for were men that would take care of them so they could be stay-at-home wives.
Let me stop you there. So the first thing that I remember you telling me was that you knew that you were going to be a single mother. And you knew that you needed to go to school to attain financial stability. So in your perspective, from somebody who was from working class, from a poor family.
We weren't even poor working class. We were just poor.
Okay, so someone from a poor family.
My family was dependent on the system. Food stamps, Medi-Cal, Section 8. That's how we survived.
Well, someone from a poor family, what you perceive as success is financial stability, which is fine, but getting to why you feel that way is essentially the point of this podcast. We talk about in class how people of different classes are conditioned to see success differently. So if you are a higher class white individual, you may have the opportunity to go to a university to figure out who you are.
Have your parents pay for it, have access to additional resources.
Exactly. You're not necessarily going to pursue your education. You're going to pursue your education for the potential to continue to grow knowledge,
right?
Not necessarily
for survival,
not necessarily for practical finances. But that was not your experience.
No, I went to college out of pure. I went to college out of pure survival.
Out of survival.
Out of pure survival. I even look back on it now, and I get really sad when I think about it because I really didn't get a healthy college experience because I was working. I was going to class. I was taking care of my sisters. My mama was sick. Like I didn't have you to my senior year, but I needed to get that degree because I could not be poor. I could not. I had to get out of poverty.
Even that, these were not the problems that Michelle put herself in.
No.
You were socialized to deal with the struggles that you dealt with in school because there were rich white kids or higher middle class white children in 2-parent households that their only adversity that they had to deal with was their grades. They didn't have to worry about going to school. They didn't have to worry about working. They didn't have to worry about feeding themselves. They may have had a part-time job for a few hours a week, but it was not what they needed to sustain their lifestyles. I had to
survive and go to school.
So school was secondary. It was still survival, but there was this idea that you needed to create a level of financial stability.
Yeah, I mean, I saw what happened when you didn't have money. I saw the life that I lived when I didn't have money. And that was not a life that I wanted for myself at all.
And you think that seeing the lavish lifestyle that grandpa had for himself, that sparked this idea that education was a way for social mobility.
It was the way out for me. I wasn't, I wasn't hood. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't any of that kind of stuff. So,
But those things were around you.
those things were around me. A lot of criminality, a lot of, all of the stuff that comes with that. And
So
I think that, hold on,
Mom. Let me stop you there before you even continue. So you said a lot of these different things were around you. Were these friends, family, cousins, that
community,
were doing
the
activity?
men your grandmother was involved with, the men that my aunties were involved with. It was just chaos. It was not good.
So if anything, it wasn't even that they were just socializing you not to go to school and be poor. They were socializing you to be a criminal, or to at least.
No, I don't think they were socializing. Okay. I think they were socializing me to be okay with the criminal element.
Okay.
I think they were socializing me to be okay with poverty and being on welfare. And
being on poverty and being criminals, that's two completely different things.
Right, but I didn't say criminal. They were socializing. I said they were socializing me to be okay with being in the presence of criminal behavior. Or the men that they were involved with engaged in criminal behavior,
Justifying these
because having the man was more important than anything else. I think they socialized me to not think about the future. I think that if I didn't have, it was almost like living, and I use this analogy a lot, living in the desert and surviving off of sips of water. Right? You can still survive. It's going to be tough, but you can still survive. And then going to my dad's house and literally having gallons of water. But then going from having gallons of water to going back to having sips of water.
So there was no. It brings me to when we talk about sport. We talked about sports in class and how sports can be a way for people to establish discipline, a way for you to compete with others in a healthy manner. And I remember you telling me that you were never able to pursue sports because your mind was so caught up in survival that there was never this thought of who Michelle is, or finding out what your character is, or essentially like exploring yourself and exploring the things around you, because all that mattered was survival. And that was not a characteristic of Michelle, but it was a characteristic of
my environment
and everyone around you. And so that brings me to the next thing. You say that all of these people around you, that like the people that my great aunts and grandmas that brought you around were, they may have not have been the best people. What did that make you think about the relationships with men that you would have going into the future? Thinking back to it now.
My mother, your grandmother, was involved with Fahima's dad for years. And because he was a violent individual, I was exposed to domestic violence early in life. And at 5 years old, I had high blood pressure because of the chaos and the violence that was going on in my home. I was 5 years old and had anxiety, and I still, at 48 years old, I still deal with anxiety because of what I experienced in my early years. I think that, and domestic violence in my family was rampant. It went from generation to generation to generation. It just kept going. I think it socialized me to, for me anyway, to not be accepting of that behavior. Even though they engaged in that behavior, I just knew somewhere along the line that wasn't okay, and that I should not engage myself with any person or any man that engages in that kind of behavior. And so even my rule of thumb now, I tell my girls, if violence is introduced into your relationship, I don't care how long you've been together, that relationship is done, because it's hard to pull back from that. But I think I was socialized to be accepting of that behavior. I think I was socialized to be accepting of the violence and the lack of resources that men bring.
The men in your proximity.
The men in my proximity. I remember when I met your dad, like we weren't together when I got pregnant with you, but he was so parallel to Fahima's. He was familiar to Fahima's dad, and when it finally clicked that I was behaving like my mother and he was behaving like John, I left. I was like, he got to go. I can't, we weren't working out anyway. And it just dawned on me that I was repeating the same behavior that my mother was repeating by being with your father.
And so, even looking at like our lives now, which is drastically different than even my life before the girls was drastically different than what you dealt with as a child. How would you say the way that you were? How would you say? How do you oppose the way that you were socialized versus the things that you tried to instill into me as well as your daughters?
Say that question one more time.
Essentially, thinking about the things that you had to deal with as a child because of the proximity and of what you were around, the society that you were around. What is important for you to instill into me as well into your daughters?
What's important
now?
to instill into you?
Yes, thinking about like what you went through when you were younger.
Well, I think one of the things that was
that could be education, that could be emotional intelligence.
All of those things. I think the first thing was is work ethic, the value of education. I'm a parent. I don't do excuses for my kids at all. I don't want to hear your excuses.
Growing up, like people around you didn't have any type of work ethic.
Grandma had a work ethic. She worked. It just wasn't work that pulled us out of poverty. And her work, unfortunately, caused us to be latchkey kids. Like, I didn't see my mom for years because she was gone when we woke up and didn't come home till we was in bed. So I think that some of the things I still, hard work, good, strong work ethic, not making excuses, education, exposing you guys to different environments, putting you in good schools, making sure that I was available to you during school. It didn't matter when, but that I was available.
I remember you were talking to me about when you would work for Grandpa and you would have to catch the city bus all the way across town to get to the job. Like, that's what I think of, like, when you talk about, like, work ethic and no excuses and things like that. Yeah,
because, I mean, if I don't go get it, who's going to go get it, you know?
Because nobody did that for you.
Right. Nobody. And I mean, the reality is, life is hard, and Grandpa wasn't going to pick me up. So I had to get on the bus and then I had to walk for a little bit after that. But there's lots of things that I wanted. I looked at what my family did and literally did the opposite. Literally, I'm like, okay, they going to turn left. I'm going to go right. So if they were turning left, I was turning right.
Okay. So for the next point, we talked about troubles a bit, and I don't want to go too much back there because we talked about a bit about your past. But I have to talk about issues. Issues being essentially troubles, but in a grander scale. That makes me think about, you brought up Section 8 as well as where Grandma was living coming up.
Where we live.
You said you had all these people living in the home in a impoverished area. You said that was all that Grandma could afford. What did that look like? Why do you think that was all that Grandma could afford? What do you think in society played a role into her only being able to afford this Section 8 housing?
Well, I don't know. I think my mother was a victim of her circumstance, like most people are. I think what people don't understand is when you choose to be different, you have to then separate yourself from everything and everybody that you know. And I don't think my mother was willing to separate herself from her mother and her siblings.
Her community.
Yeah, her community. Something kept her there, saying that my siblings need me. My siblings need me. And I remember asking her, but did they ask you for help? Because how do you know they needed you? Where was their mom and their daddy at? They needed their mom and their daddy. They didn't need you. And so she sacrificed her own herself for her siblings. But I've never agreed with that because your siblings never asked you to help them.
Let me stop you there. That completely reminds me of this Mills quote. That being the first fruit of this imagination and the first lesson of the social science that embodies it is the idea that the individual can understand his own experience and gauge his own fate only by locating himself within his period. That he can know his own chances in life only by becoming aware of those individuals in his circumstance.
So her only choice based on that quote was to stay within her comfort zone.
To stay within her
comfort zone and never to leave.
It was only
to
about
be
survival. There was never any type of awareness with my grandmother. There was no type of awareness about how her predecessors, her sisters, her cousins, about how her actions played into her comfortability isn't the right word, but her what's the word? Not necessarily comfort, but what's
Potential, maybe
like
her
content,
her conditioning,
content.
maybe her conditioning, or maybe her worldview.
Okay.
You know, because I mean, this is what this quote is really talking about. It's talking about a person's worldview based on their own like life circumstances, and our worldview literally comes from the circumstances in which we are currently surviving.
But you even said, when your family turned left, you would turn right. At an early age, let me finish. At an early age, you realized, whether that was because of grandpa, whatever that was, you realized that there was something off about what our family did because they lived in poverty, and you knew that you had
Well,
to do
I was a
something
victim.
different.
I was a victim of those circumstances. Living like me and Fahima never
But
had.
you knew that something was wrong
Yes,
about that. At
when
some
you
point in time, wait. At some point in time, you realized that you had to do something different. You were
Yeah.
aware that these relationships might not be healthy. I have to establish something that's different. They may not have pursued an education. I have to do something that's different. So you had some type of awareness of the people around you.
Well, I'm trying to let me answer the question. It's not that I had awareness. Yes, I had awareness of that, but
Some type.
I was living in those circumstances. I was living in a house with 10 people, a 2-bedroom apartment with 10 people and a dog, and there was not enough food for everybody. I was sleeping on the floor because I didn't have a bed. We had to go to food banks to get food. I learned that not everybody went to food banks to get food. I think junior high school was probably the most aware I became of how poor we were, because the clothes I wore, people made fun of. The shoes I wore, people made fun of. My hair, people made fun of. Like, I didn't have enough money for anything. I was just a black raggedy Ann, you know. And so I think I became very aware of my financial situation and circumstances in junior high school, even before junior high school. But I think it was magnified in junior high school because that's when kids are starting to figure out like what groups they belong in, who's popular, who isn't, what things are in, what things are out. We couldn't afford anything.
But we bringing that back to my childhood as well as the girls' childhood, for instance. We didn't go without the same way that you went without. But children, as a child, and even as someone who is not aware of their social surroundings, it's dangerous to judge yourself strictly based off of the rewards that you're given, because most of the times you don't get to choose the rewards that you have. Like, I didn't work for any of the clothes that I had coming up. The girls didn't work for any of the clothes that they had coming up. But like, if you're a child, like for instance, like yourself, if you're walking around with holes in your shoes, you think that you're the problem, but you were never the problem. It was the fact that your family, your aunts, your uncles, the people in your neighborhood, in your proximity, they didn't have the money to give you these things. And so I think that's why Mills's take about the sociological imagination is so important, is because our actions as well as our lifestyles are not necessarily just the decisions that we make, but our proximity as well as the people around us, the perceptions around us are just as important.
Yeah.
As
what we're exposed to.
as our own actions. We are who we surround ourselves with.
Why do you think there are, families that have 3rd and 4th and 5th generation doctors and lawyers and whatever else? One reason why I want you to go to medical school and become psychiatry, because we can build on that, right? And we can start to build intergenerational wealth if you follow those footsteps. Because in my mind, I've set the foundation, and you need to now build upon the foundation that I've set. And then we can go from there.
And this is so you're so adamant about this because you know what it's like to be poor. You know what it's like to not have generational wealth.
I don't have generational wealth now,
you know
right?
You know what it's like to struggle financially.
Yeah. And there is nothing like going to school with no jacket. There is nothing like wearing shoes so long, and the shoes I had, they were like a patent leather dress shoe that I literally rubbed holes in the bottom of them. Like, and I had to put like cardboard in the bottom to try to make it through the school day. You know what I mean? Or try to put,
Even this quote by Mills, it says, "The facts of contemporary history are also facts about the success and and the failures of individual men and women." You weren't presented the opportunity to go to medical school. Me and your kids are, because you have a successful business,
Right.
because you're financially, well, let me finish, because you're financially and emotionally stable. Me and my sisters are able to explore more of our individualities, explore more of our knowledge, explore more of who we are, because we're not living within survival. You weren't presented with that opportunity, but because you have finances and because you are financially successful and you're emotionally stable at this point in time in your life, it gives us, we have more of a chance to be successful, to build, essentially, like you said, to build off of your success.
Well, the thing about it, the difference too, is you guys don't have the level of trauma that I had either. And because of that, you have more access to your learning potential. I think that if you have a level, the kind of trauma that I have, you don't have access to I don't have access to my full brain.
Well, but that's
because of the trauma.
That's my
but
point, though,
because
Mom.
you are calm and because I've been able to provide you with a relatively safe environment, you have the ability to supersede me because of the sacrifices that I made.
The sacrifices that you made, and the stability that you provided us. But that's the point. That's the point of the whole quote. The things that we deal with, yes, we can put ourselves in a situation. We can make stupid decisions. We can put ourselves into situations that are not beneficial. But if I become a success, I could not become a successful doctor if you did not have a successful business.
Right.
That's the point that I'm making.
We can think about, like,
That's
we
the
talk
point
about.
I'm building. I'm building off of the life that you presented me.
Which is
Aaron and Evan are building off of the life that you presented us. You were establishing that foundation, and you were building from nothing. And so that's essentially the point. We are our predecessors. That's the point. And so, yes, the obstacles that I deal with going to medical school are my own obstacles, but I wouldn't have even had the finances, the emotional stability, the patience, or the time to even apply or get into medical school if you did not have successful businesses that or safety nets to put me into these positions. That is the point
Right.
of what Mills is trying to say. And
Right.
so it's irresponsible to base our circumstances only off of our own actions.
But
that plays a role,
right? But when you were a child, nothing that happens to you as a child is your fault.
Not even just as a child, though, as an adult as well. Not even just as a child, but as an adult as well. And so it's important to analyze our lives based off of, like Mill says, our
Milieu.
off of our milieu, because we are who we surround ourselves with. You know, you talked about grandma living in a Section 8 housing. Redlining probably played a role into that.
Redlining?
Redlining probably played a role into that. I don't want to get too much into that in this take, but even her circumstances,
I don't know.
They weren't simply based off of the things that she dealt with.
Redlining? I don't know if redlining has anything to do with Section 8 housing.
It does.
Okay,
It
well,
does.
I don't know the connection.
There was a lot of redlining in Fresno. I can send you the article on it. We read an
So,
article.
but
about that.
redlining helps kind of push certain people to live in certain neighborhoods. I understand that.
It pushed us into the corners of Fresno. I can send you an article on that.
Yeah.
But like we're taking a detour. I don't even want to talk too much about that.
Okay.
But we're gonna stop there for now. We're going to stop there for now, Professor, and see what you have to say about the things that we talked about today. This was our first podcast, and so there were definitely some jitters and whatnot. But let us know what you think. We're definitely down for any type of revisions. If there's any particular thing, any questions that you have, anything that you would like us to focus on, we're definitely open for constructive criticism. But I appreciate your time, Professor, and I hope that you enjoy the stories that my mother had to tell that played into who I am, and played into who I am, as well as
the things that she deals with on a daily basis, as well as the success and the inclusion of her businesses, and why I will be pursuing medicine, and how her life, the struggles that she dealt with, and the success that she has now plays into the things that I will be doing within the near future. And thank you so much.